The night air was cold, and the sky hung heavy with storm clouds as I walked toward my car. I had just finished a long shift at work, exhausted but relieved to finally head home. My husband had been acting strange lately, quiet, distant, and oddly affectionate at times. He kissed my forehead that morning, told me to drive safely, and smiled in a way that felt unfamiliar. Still, I brushed it off, convincing myself I was overthinking again. Love makes you ignore warnings that your gut whispers. As I turned the key in the ignition, the engine came to life, humming smoothly, too smoothly almost. I remember the faint metallic scent in the air, something sharp, like oil mixed with fear, but I shrugged it off and started driving. The streets were nearly empty, the city lights flickering across the windshield. I rolled the window down slightly, letting the cool wind hit my face. For a moment, I felt peace. Then came the bend, a curve I'd driven 100 times before. I pressed the brake gently, and nothing happened. My foot sank into the pedal, but there was no resistance, no sound, no response. My heart leapt into my throat. I pressed harder, panic flooding my veins, but the car kept accelerating. My hands trembled as I gripped the steering wheel tighter, trying to think, trying to breathe. The sound of the tires screeching against the asphalt was the only thing that broke the silence of the night. The car spun out of control, skidding toward the guardrail. I could hear my own scream, raw and desperate, as metal clashed with concrete. In those few seconds, time slowed down. I saw flashes of my life, our wedding day, his smile, his promises, every word that once felt like forever. The impact came hard. The car slammed to a stop, smoke rising from the hood. My chest hurt, my head was spinning, and the airbag had exploded against my face. But I was alive. Barely. I crawled out of the wreckage, trembling, tasting blood, and gasping for air. The rain started to fall, washing away the dust and smoke as I stood there, staring at the twisted remains of what could have been my coffin. The paramedics arrived minutes later, but everything after that felt like a blur. The hospital lights were harsh, blinding, and the smell of antiseptic filled the room. They said it was a miracle I survived. I nodded, numb, not fully understanding the weight of those words. But when the mechanic came the next morning to inspect the wreck, his face turned pale. He looked at me, hesitated, and said softly, "The brake line was cut." Those words echoed in my ears like a death sentence. My stomach turned cold. I tried to process it, but my mind kept rejecting the idea. It couldn't be. It shouldn't be. But deep down, I knew. I replayed every moment from the past week. His sudden interest in my car, his offer to check something under the hood, the way he'd avoided eye contact when I mentioned taking a trip out of town. All the little things I dismissed came crashing back like shards of glass slicing through denial. My husband, the man I loved, the one I vowed to stand by, had tried to kill me. I sat there in that sterile hospital room, staring at the white walls, feeling every ounce of love I had for him curdle into something dark and sharp. When I got home a few days later, I walked through our house like a stranger. The scent of his cologne lingered in the hallway, the coffee mug he used every morning still sat by the sink. Everything looked the same, but nothing felt safe anymore. My hands shook as I opened the garage door and stared at the empty spot where my car used to be. The silence in that space screamed louder than any words could. I wanted to scream, to ask him why, but fear chained my voice. He didn't know I'd found out. Not yet. That night, I sat by the window, watching the rain pour down, thinking about how close I had come to dying. Every lightning flash outside illuminated fragments of my past, our laughter, our fights, the slow decay of a marriage built on lies. And beneath all that pain was one unshakable truth. Someone who could smile at you in the morning and cut your brakes by night was no longer a man, but a monster wearing a wedding ring. I realized the danger hadn't passed. It was sitting in the next room, pretending to be my husband. And as I listened to the sound of his footsteps down the hall, I understood that my survival was not an accident. It was a beginning. The morning after I returned home, the house felt heavier than ever, every sound magnified by suspicion. The clinking of dishes in the sink, the faint creak of the floorboards, they no longer felt ordinary. I watched him from across the table as he ate his breakfast like nothing had happened. His calmness terrified me. The same hands that buttered his toast were the ones that had loosened the bolts on my brakes. Every smile he gave me now looked rehearsed, like he'd practiced it in a mirror to appear innocent. I studied him quietly, memorizing every small gesture, every flicker in his expression. I wanted to believe there was another explanation, something less monstrous, but the truth was becoming clearer with every heartbeat later that day. I found myself drawn back to the garage, unable to stop thinking about the mechanic's words. I crouched near the tools, the smell of grease and gasoline filling my nose, and noticed something odd. A small piece of tubing lay behind a box of car polish, cleanly sliced, just like the mechanic had described. My hand shook as I picked it up. It wasn't there by accident. My mind raced back to that night a week ago when he insisted on checking my car, saying, "You've been driving too fast lately. Let me make sure you're safe." The irony burned through me. He said safe, and yet, that was the moment he made sure I wouldn't be as the hours passed. I replayed every detail of the past few weeks. The secretive phone calls, the whispering that stopped when I entered the room, the sudden withdrawal from our usual life together. I realized how carefully he had been planning it. Every gesture of kindness had been a step toward betrayal. When I tried to recall any recent argument that could justify such cruelty, I couldn't. There was nothing that could make sense of it. But then something struck me, the insurance papers. 2 months ago, he'd insisted I sign some documents, claiming they were routine updates. I didn't think twice. I trusted him. Now, sitting in the silence of our living room, that trust mocked me. I went through the drawers, searching for those papers, and when I found them, my breath caught. My name was there, but so was a policy worth more than my life. The pieces started falling into place. The sudden romantic gestures, the surprise dinners, the way he had started calling me his everything again, it was all part of his act. He wasn't trying to fix our marriage. He was preparing his alibi. The thought made my chest tighten with rage and disgust. I realized that my death would have been his freedom, both financially and emotionally. He wanted to play the grieving husband, the victim of tragedy, while living comfortably off the money my death would bring. The thought of it made my hands clench into fists. How long had he been pretending? How many nights had he smiled at me while imagining my car crashing off that highway? That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake beside him, staring at the ceiling, listening to his steady breathing. Every breath he took sounded like a lie. I wondered what went through his mind as he drifted to sleep. Did he feel guilt? Fear? Or just satisfaction, believing he'd succeeded? I turned my head and looked at him in the dim light. He looked peaceful, undeservingly peaceful. My eyes burned, not from tears but from fury that I couldn't yet show. I knew that confronting him directly would be dangerous. A man capable of cutting brakes wouldn't hesitate to do worse if cornered. I needed proof, not emotion. Over the next few days, I started watching him carefully, documenting every movement, every inconsistency. I found receipts hidden in his jacket pocket, one for a garage 2 towns over, dated 2 days before my crash. He had paid cash. My heart pounded as I took photos of everything, saving them to a secret folder on my phone. I even set up a small voice recorder under the kitchen counter, just to capture what he might say when he thought I wasn't around. Every word he spoke felt like venom wrapped in charm. He started asking if I was feeling better, pretending to care. His voice made my skin crawl. Then, one evening, while he was in the shower, his phone buzzed on the counter. A message preview flashed on the screen. It was from an unknown number. The words were short but enough to freeze my blood. "It's done. She survived." My vision blurred. My hands trembled as I opened the message thread. There were more brief exchanges, all about timing, insurance, and payment. It wasn't just his plan. He'd involved someone else. My stomach turned as I scrolled through them, the realization cutting deeper than any wound. The man I married wasn't just a liar. He was a criminal, one heartbeat away from being a murderer. When he stepped out of the shower, water dripping from his hair, he smiled at me like nothing had happened. I forced a smile back, hiding the storm brewing behind my eyes. I knew then that everything had changed. I wasn't the same woman who had trusted him, loved him, or forgiven him. He had taken that woman and tried to destroy her. But what he didn't know is that something far stronger had taken her place. The truth was now my weapon, and he had no idea that his own lies were about to turn against him. The days after the crash were a blur of quiet suspicion and forced smiles. I moved through the house like a ghost, careful with every step, careful with every word. I couldn't let him know what I had discovered. I was pretending to heal, but inside, I was watching. Every time I looked at him, I saw the man who tried to kill me. His calmness was terrifying. He didn't flinch when I mentioned the accident, didn't even ask how the investigation was going. He just said I should rest and forget about it. That sentence echoed in my mind, laced with arrogance. Forget about it, as if I could ever forget the sound of my car skidding across the asphalt while my life flashed before my eyes. He wanted me to bury the truth, but something unexpected happened, something he never saw coming. His sister came to visit. She arrived one afternoon without warning. Her face was pale, her eyes red, like she hadn't slept in days. She hugged me tightly, too tightly, and I could feel her trembling. At first, I thought it was pity. Maybe she was just scared after hearing about the crash. But when she pulled back, her expression told a different story. She looked at me with something closer to guilt than sympathy. I invited her inside, and she followed silently, her eyes darting around as if afraid someone might be listening. When I asked if she wanted coffee, she shook her head. "We need to talk," she whispered, her voice barely steady. My heart skipped a beat. There was something in her tone that made me brace myself. I sat across from her, waiting, the ticking of the clock filling the silence between us. She hesitated at first, her hands fidgeting in her lap, her lips trembling as if she were fighting herself. Then she said something that made the world tilt again. "He told me to keep quiet," she said, eyes glistening. "But I can't anymore." I stared at her, confused, scared, my pulse racing. "What are you talking about?" I asked, my voice almost breaking. She looked down, tears spilling onto her hands. "The car," she whispered. "He said he just wanted to scare you, that it wouldn't kill you, only teach you a lesson." The room spun. My breath caught in my throat. I could hear my heartbeat pounding in my ears. "He told you," I managed to say. She nodded, covering her face. "He told me after it happened. I didn't know he actually did it until that night. He said you were too controlling, too stubborn, that you needed to be humbled." I tried to stop him. "I swear I did." Her voice cracked, and for a moment, all I could do was stare at her. Every word she said sliced deeper. The betrayal was already unbearable, but hearing that his own sister had known about it made it worse. Yet, there was something different in her tears. She wasn't defending him. She was breaking under the weight of what she'd hidden. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to demand why she hadn't spoken sooner, but when I looked at her trembling hands, I saw fear. She was scared of him too. She told me how he had become colder over the past year, how he manipulated people around him, how he made her promise not to tell anyone. He had even threatened to cut her off financially if she interfered. "He's not who you think he is," she said softly. "He's worse." The anger inside me started to shift, no longer wild but focused. Her confession didn't bring peace, but it brought clarity. I finally knew I wasn't crazy. The crash wasn't fate, it was intent. And now I had someone else who knew the truth. We sat in silence for a while, both shaking, both broken in different ways. I asked her why she decided to tell me now. She looked up, eyes hollow, and said, "Because he said he's planning something else. He's afraid you'll go to the police. He said if you open your mouth, he'll make it look like suicide next time." My stomach twisted, nausea rising in my throat. I realized that surviving once wasn't enough. He wouldn't stop until he was sure I was gone. His sister grabbed my hand, desperate. "Please," she said, "you have to get away from him." I looked at her, and in that moment, I saw the same fear that had been living inside me since that night on the road. She was trapped too, just in a different kind of cage. We both were. But something in her eyes told me she wasn't just confessing out of guilt. She wanted to help. She wanted to make it right. For the first time since the crash, I didn't feel alone. I didn't know if I could trust her completely, but I could see the truth written all over her face. She was broken by his lies, just like me that night. After she left, I sat in the dark, playing her words over and over in my mind. My husband's voice echoed in my memory, calm and calculated, the same voice that had convinced me he loved me. I looked at the door, half expecting him to walk in, to sense the shift that had just happened. But he didn't. He was out, pretending to be the perfect man, unaware that his own sister had shattered his secret. I knew that from this moment on, everything would change. What he thought was control had just started to slip from his hands. And I had something now that he never imagined I'd get, the truth, whispered by the only person he thought would stay silent after that night. I couldn't look at him the same way again. Every word he spoke, every casual touch, felt poisoned. I moved through the house like a shadow, careful to hide the storm that was brewing inside me. He didn't know that I had talked to his sister, didn't know that his perfect little secret had cracked open. For the first time, I wasn't scared of him, I was watching him, studying him, learning how he thought. Revenge wasn't born from hatred, it was born from survival. And I had survived. His sister and I began to talk secretly, our conversations coded in simple messages, our meetings quiet and brief. She was the only person who understood what I was walking through, the only one who could help me bring his truth to light. We started piecing things together, carefully collecting fragments of evidence. She showed me messages he had sent her, proof that he had confessed his involvement in the brake tampering. He had even bragged about how clever he was, how no one would ever suspect him. I could barely read the words without shaking. But anger has a way of sharpening focus. I needed to stay calm. We decided to act slowly, not just to expose him, but to destroy the image he had built so carefully. To the world, he was charming, generous, a devoted husband. Behind closed doors, he was a man capable of murder. The contrast between those two faces became my weapon. His sister and I agreed that we would let him reveal himself, one mistake at a time. The first step was to make him comfortable again. I pretended to forgive him for everything, his distant behavior, his coldness, his late nights out. I even thanked him for taking care of me after the accident. The act made my skin crawl, but it worked. He started lowering his guard. The guilt he might have once felt had long disappeared, replaced by arrogance. He believed he had won, that I was back under his control. I could see the satisfaction in his smirk, the ease in his movements. Every time he laughed, every time he leaned close, I reminded myself that I was only playing a role. I smiled when I wanted to scream. I touched his hand when I wanted to pull away. I said, "I love you," when my heart was full of venom. I was feeding the ego of a man who had no idea the world around him was about to crumble. Meanwhile, his sister started digging into his financials. She worked quietly, carefully pulling bank records, transaction slips, and emails he thought were long deleted. What she found made everything clearer. A large sum of money had been transferred to a mechanic 2 towns away, the same one I had found receipts for. The proof was there, solid and undeniable. I remember sitting on the edge of her bed, staring at those papers, feeling a strange calm settle over me. The fear that had ruled my life for weeks was gone. All that was left was determination. He thought he had broken me, but instead, he had given me purpose. We started recording conversations whenever possible. Sometimes I'd ask him gentle, innocent questions, trying to lead him into slips. "Do you ever think about that night?" I'd ask. He would shrug, pretending not to care. Once, he even said, "You're lucky it wasn't worse." The way he said it chilled me. It wasn't concern, it was satisfaction. His sister and I shared every detail, building a file, piece by piece, something we could use when the time came. Each message, each word, each lie was another nail in the coffin of his carefully crafted reputation, but working together came with risks. One evening, while we were on the phone, he almost caught her. She hung up mid-sentence, her voice tight with panic. I sat frozen, afraid he might have suspected something. Hours later, she called again, whispering that he had questioned her about her recent behavior. We knew we had to be careful, but we couldn't stop now. We were too close. I assured her that once we had enough evidence, We would take it all to the police, and he would have nowhere to hide. She sounded scared but relieved, her voice trembling as she said, "For the first time, I think he's afraid." That thought gave me strength. I started to notice small changes in him too, how he would watch me when he thought I wasn't looking, how his confidence flickered for brief moments. Maybe he could sense the shift, the quiet rebellion forming under his roof. I started keeping my phone close, every conversation recorded, every movement noted. I even changed the locks on the windows without telling him, not for safety, but as a reminder to myself that I was no longer his victim. One night, when he was asleep, I looked at him for a long time. His face was calm, peaceful, like a man without a conscience. But to me, it looked different now, fragile, temporary. He had no idea that his sister, the person he thought he controlled, had joined forces with the woman he tried to destroy. We were no longer two broken women orbiting his cruelty. We were the storm waiting to strike. I knew the moment would come soon, the moment where everything he had built, his lies, his power, his control, would start to fall apart, and the best part was that he would never see it coming. The night we decided to act was cold, the kind of cold that made every breath feel sharp. His sister came over under the pretense of bringing dinner, smiling like everything was fine. He welcomed her warmly, the perfect brother, the perfect mask. I watched him move around the kitchen, laughing, pouring wine, oblivious to the fact that both of us were watching every move he made for a different reason. Beneath the surface of that ordinary dinner, we had a plan forming, quiet, careful, and precise. I had already backed up every recording, every message, every piece of proof we'd collected. His sister had sent copies to a lawyer she trusted. If anything happened to us, everything would go public. That was our insurance. That was the reason I could finally look him in the eye without flinching. He started drinking, talking about business, pretending to be charming. His sister played along perfectly. She laughed at his jokes, teased him, made him feel safe. I joined in, though my stomach was tight with disgust. The goal was simple: get him to talk. We knew from experience that his arrogance was his weakness. He loved to gloat, to feel smarter than everyone else. As the evening went on, his tone shifted. The alcohol loosened his tongue, his words slurred slightly, and that's when she began steering the conversation. She brought up my accident casually, like it was old news. "You must have been terrified that night," she said to me, her eyes flicking toward him. I nodded slowly, keeping my expression neutral. He smirked, swirling his drink, and said, "Well, she drives like she owns the road." Maybe she needed a little reminder. The moment he said it, the room seemed to freeze. My pulse quickened, but I forced myself not to react. His sister's hand tightened around her glass, her knuckles white, but she smiled faintly, playing along. "You always did have a dark sense of humor," she said. He laughed, leaning back in his chair. "I'm just saying, sometimes people only learn when they get scared a little." Every word that came out of his mouth was recorded. My phone, hidden behind a vase on the table, captured everything. I wanted to scream at him, to tell him I knew, but I couldn't. Not yet. The trap wasn't fully sprung. We needed him to reveal himself completely later that night. When he stepped outside to take a call, his sister looked at me, her eyes wide with rage and relief. We had what we needed. The audio wasn't just proof of intent, it was proof of his nature. But the night wasn't over. He came back inside, his mood darker now, his tone sharper. I could tell the alcohol was shifting from confidence to cruelty. He accused me of being distant, of not trusting him, of acting like a victim. "Maybe you should be grateful you're even alive," he said suddenly, his voice cutting through the silence. The words hung in the air like smoke. His sister stood, unable to hold back anymore. "Grateful," she said, her voice trembling. "You nearly killed her, and you want her to be grateful?" His head snapped toward her, eyes narrowing. The mask finally cracked for a long moment. No one spoke. The air was thick with tension, the kind that presses against your chest until it hurts to breathe. He laughed then, a low, chilling sound that made my stomach turn. "So, she told you," he said, almost casually. "Of course she did. You always were weak." His tone was full of venom, but behind it, I saw something else: fear. He was realizing too late that the control he once had was gone. His sister didn't back down. "You're going to pay for what you did," she said quietly. He stepped closer, towering over her, but she didn't flinch. I could see her hands trembling, but her eyes were steady. I reached for my phone, my thumb hovering over the screen, ready to send everything we had to the police. He started shouting then, his voice echoing through the house, accusing us of betrayal, of trying to ruin him. The anger he had hidden for months poured out like acid. He called me ungrateful, said I was lucky he let me live. Those words were the final confession. The man standing before me wasn't just a liar, he was proud of what he had done. His sister recorded everything too, her phone hidden in her sleeve. When he realized we weren't afraid anymore, that his power over us had vanished, something in his eyes shifted. He looked around the room, his breathing heavy, the realization sinking in that he was trapped. He tried to backtrack, to turn it into a joke, but it was too late. We had every word saved, every threat, every confession. His sister walked past him without a word, straight to the door, her face pale but determined. I followed her, leaving him standing there, his voice still echoing behind us, full of rage and disbelief. Outside, the air felt cleaner, colder, but lighter somehow. She looked at me and said, "It's over. We have him." I nodded, my hands still shaking, the adrenaline coursing through me. It wasn't over yet, not completely, but the trap had closed, and for the first time, I saw the cracks forming in the armor of the man who thought he was untouchable. The days that followed felt unreal, like stepping out of a long, dark tunnel into a world that no longer belonged to him. I woke up every morning to silence, but it wasn't the silence of fear anymore. It was freedom, the kind that feels fragile at first, as if it could shatter if I breathed too loudly. His sister and I had handed everything over to the police, the recordings, the messages, the receipts, even the insurance documents he had forged. Watching them take those files felt like finally exhaling after holding my breath for months. The truth was no longer mine to carry. It was out there, in the hands of people who could use it to bring him down. Still, a part of me couldn't rest. He was dangerous, unpredictable, and I knew he wouldn't give up easily. The police investigation moved faster than I expected. They called me in for questioning, asked about the marriage, about the accident, about everything that had led up to that night. I answered every question calmly, every word steady, though inside, my heart was still racing. His sister testified too, her voice shaking but strong. For the first time, she spoke without fear. The look on her face when she walked out of that room said everything: relief mixed with grief, because exposing him meant losing the only brother she'd ever known. I wanted to comfort her, to tell her that she'd done the right thing, but both of us knew there were no words big enough to fix what he had broken. When the police finally came to arrest him, I wasn't there. I couldn't be. I watched from across the street, hidden behind a curtain, as they led him out of the house in handcuffs. His expression was unreadable: shock, anger, maybe disbelief. For years he had played the part of the perfect man, the charming husband, the one everyone admired. Seeing him stripped of that mask was almost haunting. The neighbors whispered, cameras flashed, and the man who once thought he could control everything now stood powerless. His eyes flicked toward my window for a brief second, and for that moment, I felt the weight of every bruise he had left on my heart. But I didn't look away. I wanted him to see me standing there, alive, unbroken, watching the empire of lies he built collapse around him. The days after his arrest were quiet but heavy. The news spread quickly: local papers, online articles, all talking about the man who had tried to murder his wife for money. People who used to praise him now spoke his name with disgust. I didn't enjoy the attention, but I took comfort in knowing the truth was finally out. No more pretending, no more secrets. His sister and I began rebuilding our lives, not together every day, but connected by something unspoken. Sometimes she'd call late at night, unable to sleep, her voice trembling as she asked, "Do you think he ever loved anyone?" I never knew how to answer that. Maybe he did once, but love that turns into cruelty isn't love at all. It's possession, and possession dies when control is lost. The trial came months later. Walking into that courtroom was harder than I expected. He sat there in his suit, still trying to look calm, still trying to play the role of the misunderstood husband. But the evidence spoke louder than any lie he could tell. The recordings played in front of everyone, his voice cold and unmistakable. The room went silent as he laughed about the crash, as he admitted to wanting to teach me a lesson. I didn't look away. Every second I listened, I reminded myself that this wasn't pain, it was proof. His sister sat beside me, tears running down her face, but she didn't hide them. When the verdict came, it felt like the air in the room shifted. Guilty on all charges after the sentencing, I walked out into the sunlight feeling like I was breathing for the first time. The world seemed brighter, sharper, almost new. I didn't celebrate, didn't cry. I just stood there, watching the leaves move in the wind, realizing that everything he'd tried to destroy had only made me stronger. People called me brave, but it didn't feel like bravery. It felt like necessity, like something I had no choice but to become. His sister stood next to me, quiet, lost in her own thoughts. She had lost her brother, but in doing so, she had found herself. We didn't say much that day. We didn't need to in the weeks that followed. I started rebuilding the pieces of my life that he had shattered. I found a new place to live, small but peaceful, where the air didn't smell like fear. I started working again, surrounding myself with people who reminded me that trust wasn't always a trap. Some nights, I still woke up hearing the sound of screeching tires, the memory of that moment where everything almost ended. But each time, I reminded myself I survived. Not by luck, but by strength. I survived him, his lies, his cruelty, and the darkness he tried to bury me in. And though the scars would never fully fade, they had become something else now, something powerful. They were proof that he failed, proof that I had risen, proof that no one, not even the man who cut my brakes, could ever break me again.